Welcome to a discussion, Israel and the new anti-Semitism, both in public demonstrations and on social media. Wide sections of society play down or even celebrate the attacks on Israel. It seems we are confronted not just with violent pogroms against Jews in Israel, but a moral pogrom against Jews and Israel in Europe as well. The questions are many. Is anti-Israeli sentiment, Israelophobia, the modern face of Jew hatred? Are we witnessing the emergence of a new anti-Semitism? I hope that tonight in our conversation we can shed more light than heat on the conversation.
I am coming from a country, and I'm representing a country here which has the largest Jewish community in Central Europe. In fact, Hungary has the third largest Jewish community in Europe after the UK and France. It is a country where new synagogues are opened, where new Jewish schools are opened, where there is a vibrant Jewish community which lives in safety. I'm coming from a country where it is unimaginable that you can have sympathy manifestations for terror, where thousands of people would show up, burn flags, and wish the death of an entire people. You can imagine that with this background, it is very important for me to be able to address this honorable audience and also just think of the failed policies that were so characteristic emanating from this city when it comes to illegal migration especially. Because in terms of the integration of the people that can come to Hungary, it is very important that they have a respect and an understanding of the Judeo-Christian values that the country, its constitution, its legal order are all built upon.
Who would have thought that 2 weeks after the slaughter of 1,400 people in Israel, that 100,000 mainly white middle-class people would come out on a demonstration in support of the community that supports and harbours the killers. It is just extraordinary. And I can't think of anything in my life which has been quite as egregious and terrible as this reaction. And I know it is not just in Britain that this is happening. It is happening through many European countries and even in America. And I think that we must recognise that this is a terrible event. The event itself, the slaughter, was bad enough, but the reaction as well is really frightening and something which we need to challenge. And in Britain, we can see that over several generations, the impact of multiculturalism in keeping societies such as the Muslim immigrants essentially separate from British values in many ways.
If you ever go into an Israeli hospital, you have lots and lots of Arab doctors in Israeli hospitals, which would have been inconceivable in South Africa under apartheid. But although there is some room for facts, and you can find instances of discrimination in Israel, in a way that misses the point. Because what I think we need to do is to try and decode these arguments, not take them at face value, decode these arguments. So when they accuse Israel of being an apartheid state, a colonial state, settler state, whatever, recognize that what they're really saying is that Israel, above all the other countries in the world, has to be judged by a different standard and is evil. And by extension, I would argue, they're also saying that about the Jewish people.
At this moment, the left party, they don't find political vision for the country. They don't find a political action possible for the people. And because they are not able to propose solutions for the people and for the country, they found a bouc émissaire, the bad Israel country who is oppressing. And from this moment, there is no equality between the victim and the violence. People who is producing violence is always on the good side, because I need to keep these votes to be sure to win the next elections. And this is the beginning of a horrific mechanic. The result is now Jean-Luc Mélenchon and the left parties are in fact the hostage, excuse me for the term, they are the hostage of their new voters. And it's one of the reasons that they are not able to tell that Hamas is a terrorist organization.
My grandmother survived Auschwitz. My mother was born in a DP camp. And I lived with that fact for many years because demonizing Israel makes a lot of people feel good. About the metro, don't answer the question by raising hands. I just want to drop a thought here. If you're on the metro with me on the way home tonight, or on the street and somebody spit at me or cursed me or kicked me, what would be your reaction?
I'd kick the shit out of them. That would be my reaction.
The newness of anti-Semitism is important. Obviously, there still is what I call old school anti-Semitism, and you have it in many parts of Europe, but old school anti-Semitism for me is not a problem. It's there, but I argue you don't have to love Jewish people. That's not an issue here. That's a fact of life. But what is a huge threat, what is a huge problem, is that you have the merging together of a number of different cultural, intellectual trends is dramatically new. It's summed up, for example, in the English language by all the talk about decolonizing society. And decolonizing society is essentially an expression of hatred for the West. It's not anti-Jewish per se. It hates the West. It hates the legacy of the West. It hates all the values that Western world has been about. From the point of view of decolonization theory, the worst people in the West, the hyper-Western, the hyper-white people are the Jews. In their eyes, sort of Jews have become not just ordinary white people, the worst kind of white people, because their privileges is much greater than anybody else's privileges. And in their eyes, they symbolize everything that is horrible about the West. And that is something that is intellectually reproduced in all kinds of different ways. And that is totally new. And what's really particularly interesting is the convergence of two different strands. Because what we have is not just Islamist anti-Semitism and woke anti-Semitism running in parallel, but it's synthesis. There's a very clear synthesis that has occurred, which gives identity politics a very clear anti-Semitic imperative, which isn't about the Jews. I mean, the Jews happen to be in the wrong place and the wrong time. That's fairly usual for them. But in addition to what they symbolize is their relationship to Western culture and Western civilization. And that is why we have to understand it doesn't matter what you think about Jewish people, because it's the whole of the West that is in the crosshairs. And the whole of the West is under threat here because the battle that we face with is a civilizational one rather than just a religious one.
We need to really educate ourselves, and especially schools. I had two children who went through Berlin schools. They went to schools with a 60% migration group of students. And my son told me just last week, he posted an Instagram post with an Israeli flag, and he had all these friends of his saying how terrible he was. He must be totally deluded, and he was quite shaken up by it, and he said to me, these were my friends, what am I going to do now? And they had all that kind of anti-racist education in their schools. I think we need to teach children about the history of Israel. They don't know very much about it at all, the reality, and just overcome the kind of cowardice we have, particularly in German society, to address these issues and to just talk truth and say what is happening. And I think if we started doing that, if we were a bit more courageous, I think we'd go a long way, and we need to really encourage teachers to do that.
What's new about the new anti-Semitism is that this is now a struggle about civilization. This is not just about the Jews. I think this is the form that the crisis is taking. Hamas do not have a monopoly on being anti-Western. Just think about our own elites. Think about the fact that they themselves no longer know what the West stands for. They cannot uphold that anymore. And it does relate to issues like the defense of the nation state. It does defend the community, the values that have underpinned the Enlightenment, progress, democracy. All these things, the elite cannot defend any longer. My point here would be that the real blame needs to be laid upon them. Hamas exists and is only getting support today because of that vacuum. That's the reason they have occupied that vacuum. I grew up in South Africa, apartheid. And I can assure you, it was nothing like the state of Israel. We need to be better informed about what that is. And I remember growing up as a Jew in South Africa when my parents used to explain to me about the Holocaust. And I looked at this and I saw these pictures of these little Jewish boys with their hands above their heads being dragooned into the wagons by the Nazis. And I thought to myself, how could that possibly happen? How was it possible that something like that could take place? And then I see what's happened in the last 2 weeks. And I now understand why that happened. It's because we have allowed it to happen. It's because we've allowed our leaders and our elites to get away with this, that we have not called this out, that we really have to start pointing the finger here and explain to people that if in any way you give an inch on any of these values, you are actually encouraging your own self-destruction. And that's what this attack on Israel was really all about. It was an attack on all of us. It was an attack on the West. It wasn't about Palestine. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with the vacuum, the moral vacuum that now exists within Western elites.